An age ago, the beating heart of our people was a king who knew only victory. He wanted nothing more than an honorable death on the battlefield. Yet, none could match him, and so he wandered the earth, becoming lost in time and tide. Then we too lost our honest purpose, while silk-clad men sat upon the throne. But tremble now, all cities that lay under the stars, for out of the shadows and mists of the land of promise, our courage has been rekindled, our heart has returned, and the world will burn.
All right, how's everybody doing tonight? Let's hope that some of you can hear me. I see there's at least 6 people in the chat right now. I see Vaz is here and Michael is here. If anybody can hear me, just give me a shout out in the chat just to make sure, as usual, I'm having technical difficulties. But that's why for almost everybody who's on the East Coast anyways. So again, if anybody can hear me, just let me know in the chat before I start. Oh, Vaz says you can hear me. Great. All right, so tonight I'm going to talk about comic framing because I want to go over another bit of a chapter from the Will Eisner book because honestly, the thing is a wealth of information. I've read parts of it before, but when you sit down and read the entire thing from one end to another, it's a completely different. But as usual, I want to start by just doing a little bit of housekeeping and say hello to everybody and let everybody know if they have any questions at all for me, just put them in the chat. I will get to them after I talk a little bit about making great comics. And if you could tag me or put a question mark on your question, that'd be great. You can ask me anything about anything I talk about tonight, about anything in my videos, anything about my crowdfunded comics, anything you want. And just a little note on that, I had indicated last week, and I just want to let everybody know in case you weren't here last week. We have one story left to color for the Valiant Hero. So the original date for shipping was October, but October has almost gone by right now, and we are still working on that last story. There are 4 stories on the Valiant Heroes, which is the book that is going to go out next. We're still working on the coloring for the Rampaging Thor, and we're finishing up. I think it's about the last couple of pages of the Valiant Heroes. So of the stories that have been done, the redemption of Kit Fox is done. The other one, which is Detention, is done. So there's 4 stories in the main book. So just to let you know, we're still working on a couple of pages, and after that we will go to print and ship as soon as possible, but there will be a slight delay in the shipping of that book. And the links for all my books are in the description. You're looking at Cardinal in the background right now. She is one of the new characters that you will find in the Valiant Heroes. Again, the Valiant Heroes and Thomas Valiant are both available at the Valiant Heroes Indiegogo site. The link for that is in the description, as well as the link for Crom the Destroyer, my return to form for low fantasy. And just to let you know, also, my Twitter handle is in there. And if you follow me on Twitter, you'll notice that I'm posting some art for Thomas Valiant #2, the upcoming book for our imprint. I guess it'll be a company, not an imprint, but it's the 4th age of Thomas Valiant #2, the 4th age comics. Renzo is starting on, I think he's done the first 5 pages so far. That will probably be a 80-page book as well. We haven't scheduled when the next Indiegogo campaign will go up, but it will be sometime in the new year, fairly early in the new year. and that will be for Thomas Valiant #2. It's going to be, I think, 60 pages for the main story of Thomas Valiant, and also a backup story that I did with Don Chin, and hopefully we'll get Mike Gustovich to do the inking, or no, the penciling on that as well, just to let everybody know. I'm going to put some art for some of these things that I'm talking about in the background. Just give me 1 second here. I got to change screens in order to put up some beautiful art for Thomas Valiant in the background that I have here. Also, what else do I have to say just before I get going on talking about making great comics? Well, I suppose I should just say that that's what this, if you've wandered across this live stream, that's what this is about. Why it is called Making Comics Fun Again, because we have to make great comics, and really the way to make great comics, and to support them by you reading them, if you're a reader, not a maker, is to make fun comics, make comics that are the way that they used to be made. And that's exactly what I always try to do. So again, put whatever comments you have in the chat, and I am going to talk a little bit about the Will Eisner way of framing a page. Quite honestly, I know I talked about this a little bit before, but as I said at the first of this live stream, when you read Will Eisner's book from cover to cover, you realize just how, well, I'd say logical it is. Quite honestly, I'm always going on about logic and reason. I'm always talking about Aristotle and everything that goes along with how he first laid down logic for Western civilization. And he talks about story as a rhetorical argument, and it's a reflection of reality, all these things that are laid out really logically. And I never realized, because I have read, parts of Will Eisner's book before, but I never sat down and read the entire thing from cover to cover. And when I'm doing this now for this series that we're doing here, because I want to cover it a little bit at a time, I realized just how logical his thinking is, and how exactly, when he is breaking down into all its parts what comics are, and how to make them, and how to appreciate them, and how to understand them, which again is all part and parcel not only of making comics but of reading them and enjoying them. He's talking in an extremely logical way. And the chapter that I'm going over a little bit tonight is about framing, but it's the largest chapter in the book by far, I do believe. And so I'm probably going to have to break that down into a couple of live streams. We'll just cover a little bit of it here tonight. Maybe in a couple of weeks I'll do some more on it, because I like to break that up as well. But again, when you go over Will Eisner stuff, when he's talking about framing of a comic book, and now I don't have any panels to show you except for the panels that are in the background for tonight, and I'll show you some great panels in the background, probably of not just my stuff, but also some Neil Adams stuff, and things I have here that are in the background that I usually show. I think I'll put that on right now. I'll put the Neil Adams one on right now as I go over the book for. There we go. Some beautiful panels there for Neil Adams. He was always one to deal with panels in a unique way and a beautiful way. But we're talking about Will Eisner, and again, he's considered the grandfather of comic book making. He was around since the very first of comic book making, and he is someone who, again, they have, although the awards that are in his name aren't worth anything right now because they're just given out as politically correct awards for being politically correct, I guess, just put it that way. But he is supposed to be the person who you go back to as a good comic writer and a good comic producer to figure out how to make good comics. And he talks about framing again, where you put your panels on a page. And he says, I'm just going to read a couple of little excerpts here, just one little line here and there, not very much. But he says at the very first of chapter 4, he says, the fundamental function of comics and comic art is to communicate ideas and or stories by means of words and pictures involving the movement of certain images such as people and things through space. Now, that might seem pretty simplistic, but quite honestly, that's the whole point of how you start this. Simplicity is the key, and that's extremely logical what he's saying here. Here's the thing. I'm always going on about the way that the people make comics currently right now, and they don't understand comic book making, and they don't understand their audience, to be sure. But this is one of the things, I think, because you see, and I've gone over a couple of interviews with other people, not interviews that I've done, but interviews from the Will Eisner School. I did one. The latest one I did was the Frank Miller one that I did for my Saturday normal videos, and it was probably about 4 months ago, 3 months ago now. But anyways, and you'll see in the background people asking questions. You can find the link for that in the original video, the one I did about Frank Miller, the link to the original video, which was from the Will Eisner School. And you'll notice that a lot of these people, they're the ones who are getting ready to join the mainstream comic producers. So they're going to the Will Eisner school and or the School for Sequential Arts, anyways, and they're going to be the up and comers for Marvel Comics and DC Comics. But even though they're studying this man and they're supposed to be doing things in his name, they don't really understand, as far as I'm concerned, how to make a good comic or what he's saying. And this is the point. This is part of the point of what I'm trying to get across with the fact that these people, since they are, we'll say, indoctrinated into their political ideology, which is based upon emotion and rejects ideas of rationality. And I've gone over that so many times in my normal videos. They simply are. I've given evidence of that, a plethora of it, if you want to go back through my videos. The point being that when you read Will Eisner's book and you read his stuff that is trying to set down the precise ways to make comics, if you don't understand the logic of reason, or sorry, if you don't understand the language of logic and reason, then I could see you misinterpreting a lot of what he has to say. And the thing is, again, since they are so politically, ideologically driven, they never actually, I don't think, had the opportunity to understand how to actually think logically and rationally, nor understand the fundamentals of those ideas. And that's exactly why, when you read that first sentence that I just read from this chapter on framing, that you wouldn't be able to see the subtle hints of what he's talking about when he talks about ideas, and these ideas slash stories, you communicate them by means of words and pictures. This is extremely logical. This is using very simple language, which you can put and understand. You can put easy meaning on and understand them in traditional current day ways of defining things like idea and story and words and pictures. But those things, when put together in that form, quite honestly, if you understand and have read, say, Aristotle or other manuals on logic and reason, you'll understand that that's extremely close to the way of describing a rational and logical argument, because your ideas are broken down into, well, actually, you're looking for the forms of things as opposed to the accidents, so you can trace them logically back towards their origin and where they come from. Just let me check the chat here to make sure we got things going. Yep, we still got Neil Adams in the background. But again, the idea of how, or sorry, the way that you deal with forms is the form in your mind is an idea, and you express those ideas with words. You can also use, it's not really logically called pictures, but it's called, oh, what is the name of it? A phantasm in your mind, but it is these ideas that are generated into a form of a picture in your mind, first of all, and then usually down on a page and things like that. So there's a whole slew of things you learn before you actually get into logic. And this is what he's saying. And I think Will Eisner was actually someone who either fundamentally understood reason and logic by studying it, or simply by understanding the medium that he worked in so well that he could see those forms of storytelling that came down through Western civilization of reason and logic, wherein you have your story being a representation of reality and a rhetorical argument, all that kind of stuff I'm always going on about. But anyways, and the thing is that if you take that original statement that I just read from Will Eisner about how to create a good story, and you do it through pictures and words, and it's fundamentally laid out that way, he continues on and says that if you're going to frame your sequential art in a way that your readers understand, you have to do it again. He says, uses language that is not exactly matching with what I always say, but he says that it's not so much an analysis that you present to them, but a recognition. So you have to get your reader to recognize certain patterns within what you're doing so that they can read in a fluent way. And this is exactly what the definition of a rhetorical argument is. And that's what I'm talking about, and Aristotle's talking about when he says, a story is a rhetorical argument. Rhetorical argument, usually, if you go back to just its basic definition, it's that you proceed upon arguments or ideas that are understood by your audience, and then you argue from there. And that's exactly what he's saying here when he's talking about framing. Will Eisner is talking about framing and how it is much more about recognition than about analysis. That's a expression of rhetorical movement of your idea through the panel, through the page. And then he talks about framing itself. And I know this might seem boring to other people, but honestly, I love the fact that he breaks it down so simply and so fundamentally so that you can understand how great comics are supposed to be laid down for you so that you can understand. Again, as I was talking about in the last couple of streams, in the last couple of weeks, the point is to make sure that your reader understands things and he's engrossed in the story. He has a suspension of disbelief so that he keeps on turning that page and he doesn't realize that he's actually reading a story. Again, that's the earlier chapters of what Will Eisner's book talks about is exactly that. So he goes on to talk about framing and about the fact that what we do as human beings is that we frame things within our minds as events. So you want to capture an event through sequential art when you're actually trying to write a comic. And the thing is that he breaks it down to the fact that if you're putting in a panel, first of all, what is a panel and what are you going to have your reader look at? He says, well, it's basically the eye of a human being and what they can see that is directly in their view. So he tries to take vision, which is made up of the vision that is in clear focus and then peripheral vision, and the clear focus vision that's in a person's view, that is what you need to focus on within your panels with when you're framing a book for sequential art. And so you take those other things that are in the peripheral and then you'll put them in the background, say, or excuse me, or allude to them in the background, because of course they're not going to be something your eye is going to fix on anyways, so you don't have to put the greatest amount of detail in it. And then he talks about rendering the elements within that line of vision and associating other images in that sequence. And this is what he calls a grammar for actually reading the narrative, both for you as an artist that you need to put down to understand that grammar, and then have the reader, understand how to read a comic. Because again, he's going back to the very basis of the fact that, you're going to have people who don't exactly know how to read a comic the first time they pick up a comic. And this is what I was talking about a couple of weeks ago, but the fact that we need to get back to the basics, to the fundamentals, to, drawing the reader along at the very first in the first couple of pages. Start off with your splash page, and then the next couple of pages where you have panels. Start the reader along so that you take them almost by the hand, although in a way that is just so simple and not, patronizing in any way, but just a basic understanding of how to read a page, which is, left to right, top to bottom. And again, let me put some one second here. Put some more art up in the background here of some beautiful art from the past. Good slideshow. There's the Spectre, but we'll leave that up anyways as I talk about framing, just so you can see some traditional ways of doing this. But as I said, in this first chapter, and I'm just scratching the surface tonight with what I'm talking about, what he talks about framing. You need to understand the way that readers come into something blind, and so put your frames down, your first panels down in a way that are going to lead the eye from top to bottom, left to right, which is the way that a normal Westerner would read a comic, because there are so many obstacles to that, even especially today. I guess not even today, but especially today, just because there are so many other forms of reading. When you look at manga in its traditional way, any Japanese or Oriental storytelling, it goes in the opposite direction. And besides that, you have things like the internet and Windows and all that kind of stuff, where you don't have to typically go from top to bottom, left to right. Things are all over the place. So you have to, he talks about the fact that you have to draw your reader along and get that suspension of disbelief going so that he turns the page and doesn't realize he's turning the page. And this is one of the things that I talked about before when I was talking about how Will Eisner doesn't equate comic books with movies, and that's one of the things that I would say current comic producers do. They tried to take the movies and shove them back into the comics, and that just doesn't work. I've always talked about that in my videos every once in a while, anyways, about how that doesn't work. You can see the fact that they're trying to take the MCU movies and they're trying to shove them back into the comic page, but you just can't do that. Will Eisner says you can do the opposite. You can go from a comic book to a movie, but you can't go straight from a movie back to a comic book. And he talks about that in this chapter about framing, because he says the most important obstacle to surmount when you're actually doing any kind of sequential art is the tendency of the reader's eye to wander. But when you have film, you have frame after frame after frame, and you can't actually see ahead of the frames when they're presented to you. You can only see the frame that is currently presented to you. But within a comic book, you can actually have your eye wander so that people might look at the last panel first and look at, even the last panel on the next page, if it's a double page spread, all that kind of stuff. So you have to keep them and their attention focused so much so that their eye doesn't wander, so that they don't ruin the story and all this kind of stuff. And the thing being also that the fact is that if well as he talks about, if you're looking at a cinema a frame, you're looking at something that's mechanical, he would say. But if you're looking at a frame as done by and sequential artist as a panel on a comic book page, that is a work of art rather than a work of technology. And it is that work of art. And again, art, going right back to logic, because logic is an art. That's what the traditional way of looking at art is. That's what you got to do. You got to work with that artistic sense of how to present to your reader this exact things. And he talks about this in terms of being a contract between the artist and the audience. Again, the thing is that when you see current comics, that contract has been broken in so many ways. And again, you might think of that contract as the suspension of disbelief. There are so many things within a current comic book that will take you out of the story. And it's not just the political ideology that they shove in sideways into the story, but it's also so many other things that affect the storytelling itself. And that is the breaking of the contract, of the suspension of disbelief, of the ability of the artist who is presenting the book, or the group of artists underneath the company, whatever you want to categorize them as. They've lost that trust, so that the person reading the book doesn't share in that contract with the artist, between the artist and the reader, that Will Eisner talks about, that is showing them the panel layout so that their eye doesn't wander, so that they trust that they're not going to, look down to the last page or the last part of the page and ruin the story on it. They're going to read in a way that they're supposed to, all these kinds of things. This is what he talks about. This trust between the artist and the reader is necessary in sequential art, because it's not something that is like cinema where you can only see one frame at a time. Since you're given, let's say, a normal page is 6 to 9 panels per page, and you're looking at a double page spread when you open up a book that's past page 1, then you're looking at 16, 19, sometimes even more panels. Sometimes you might get less, but you're looking at a lot of different panels there, and your eye has to precisely go from left to right, top to bottom. And again, it is the trust that is built up by the artist that is working with fundamental things that your audience understands, in order for them to go in that way and enjoy that story and be engrossed in that story, so that they can enjoy this suspension of disbelief and this world that's being presented to them. And that's what gets you to keep turning the page. And this is at the heart of everything that I talked about on my channel, about the fact that there is no more trust between the audience and the artist. So this is a really fundamental chapter in Will Eisner's thinking, if you ask me. And so he talks about this in terms of also being a discipline, because, of course, if you have this contract of trust between the author and the reader, then the reader is going to be disciplined enough in order to read panel after panel after panel, and so engross himself in that story, because he doesn't want to ruin the story for himself as he's reading, because he's so engrossed in it. And again, the discipline of the absolute discipline of it is what he talks about. And that's something that I would say is so contrary to modern comics, the idea of discipline. But anyways, so he talks about, I've probably been talking way too long about this for today. Look, it's 25 minutes already. But and I haven't even gotten through the first two sections of this part of chapter 4 of Will Eisner's book on creating comics. But again, this is what I wanted to talk about tonight, because this is what I try to do with my making of comics, is to look at the basic old way, the great old way of making comics, and to return to those ideas of how to make comics great. And I try to expand my knowledge on that week after week as much as possible, so I can make better comics time after time when I make a new comic. And that's why I do this series, so I can, sort of force myself to learn new things and talk about it, not to pontificate and tell you this is how you make great comics, but to say this is how traditionally it was made, and they made great comics and had spectacular results with it, much more than you'd see today in any way. But the idea that there is this contract between the artist and the reader, that is something that I think is completely lost on modern current comics. And maybe it's just because they're owned by giant companies and they don't really care. All they want to do is keep the reader consuming. But at the same time, you can't do that unless, of course, they keep on reading the story, because if you're having sequential art, it's all about the story. So hopefully I haven't rambled too much today. I was a little bit unprepared for today, because I was trying to get my computer and everything else to connect correctly. So I didn't think about my normal live stream, we'll say, script in my head as much as I normally do. But that's the basic things that I wanted to talk about the fact that Will Eisner is talking in a reasonable and logical way, presenting comics in this reasonable and logical way, and talking about this fundamental contract between the artist and the reader. So let me know in the comments if you have any questions about that. Let's see who is here, and I'll take a look at, from the very first of the chat, who is here. Vaz is here. He was here from the first. How you doing, Vaz? Michael is here as well. Let's see who else we got here. Swordbreaker. Not sure, Swordbreaker, if I've seen you in the chat before. He says, I can hear you from Colorado. Very good. Let's see. He has another comment as well. I'll go through the comments as I say hello to everybody. I have used your discussions on the cardinal virtues in my classes with my students. With my high school students. Okay. They were great discussions, and it really made them think. Well, that's great to hear. I'm glad to hear that. It's something that I talk about a lot on my normal videos for Saturday. Let's see. I'm going to put up some Neil Adams in the background once again, just to talk, since we're talking about panels. But back to my comments. I talk about virtues so much in my normal videos because I talk about the traditional idea of a hero, and the traditional idea of a hero in Western civilization for 3,000 years as a paragon of virtue, despite what people tried to present to you as a hero today. So those virtues that are listed as cardinal virtues in our present day society were listed as a same kind of expression even in ancient Greek society, with the idea of the virtues, the four virtues, which are prudence, justice, temperance, and fortitude. So I could go on all day about the virtues. So I appreciate the fact that other people are appreciating my talks about virtue and aren't getting bored by them. Let's see. Scrolling down, Mystic is here. How you doing, Mystic? He says Aristotle's Poetics is what influenced me the most during my university's years. Yes. In case you're wondering, I was talking about Aristotle and how he talks logically about storytelling, and that would be in Aristotle's Poetics. And we don't have a lot of Aristotle's works have been lost to time. He does break down comedy, which is the basic form of one of the Greek plays. The other would be tragedy, and we don't have, if I remember correctly, the tragedy. Much of what he has said about that, but at the very least, you can glean a lot from what he talks about comedy and how it is different from tragedy in the Poetics. So that's a book if anyone's looking for really heavy study material for how to create and understand good stories. You go back to Aristotle. Let's see. Vaz says a good sign of great comic is a comic you want to read again after some time has passed. That's a good point, Vaz, because when we're talking about framing and sequential art and how the reader's eye needs to be, disciplined enough to follow along the story. If you're reading a story again, you already know the story, and yet you want to do the exact same thing you did originally, which is to say, to draw yourself along as if you have never read this before, even though you know to some extent, depending on how much memory you have, to some extent, how the story is going to go, and yet you discipline yourself enough so that you'll do it again because you want to relive that suspension of disbelief. So, yeah, if you can be engrossed in the suspension of disbelief by reading the story more than once, that is the hallmark of a great comic. You are completely right. I think Will Eisner would agree with that statement, to be sure. Let's see, scrolling down. Mystic also says, I'm not sure. Let's see. He drew the first Superman. Let's see. Imitator Wonder Man for Fox Comics. I'm not sure. I think Mystic is talking to someone else, not me, because I don't understand what he's saying there. Let's see. Rex is here. How you doing? Rex is in the chat. Let's see who else is in the chat. I think we have Sound Engraver here. Sound Engraver says, sorry I'm late. I had to write down a few lines of a short story before I forgot about it. The struggle is real, Sound Engraver. I know exactly what you mean. I'm always struggling with so many stories in my head at once. I have to jot them down as quickly as possible before I move on to something else, so that I can later come back to them and understand where I was in my thinking when I wanted to write the original story for what I'm always looking now to find new ways to publish my stories. So yeah, when you have to take time to write your story down, that means that you have some appreciation for the process and how hard it is to write a story. I always give Sound Engraver a shout out. I'll put her comment back up for a second. Sound Engraver has a channel very much like mine, I would say. She talks about pop culture ideas and the bigger picture in pop culture ideas, but ties them much more to music and her musical interpretations and inspirations and all that kind of stuff, which is quite different from me, which I do comic books. But again, we cover a lot of the same ground. So if you want to look at here are some really good interpretations of those things, go over to Sound Engraver's channel and give her a subscription. Let's see who else is here. Robert is in the chat. How you doing? I couldn't come up with I didn't know what to call it today's episode, I guess we'd call it today's live stream. That's why I just put I've been framed, because it's all about framing, comic book framing that Will Eisner is talking about. That's where the center of what I was talking about today is coming from. Let's see. Oh, Vaz got some nice explanatory comments. Again, I think storytelling in comic books is a little different depending on their location. Franco-Belgian books are mostly like watching a self-contained episodic movie with a classic panning camera. I'd never thought of it that way. So you're talking about bande dessinée, which is what basically they call comics in France and Belgium, because, well, Belgium is basically France. Just broke off a long time ago. Anyways, yeah, I never thought of it in those terms, but it would be a much more French way of looking at things, I think, quite honestly, to take a panning shot of things. That's why when I talk about comics, I talk mostly about North American comics, because again, it's not just the difference between how you tell a story, but the difference in how the audience understands the telling of a story. And again, this is something that Will Eisner just talked about in the things that I was reading about the chapter on framing, which is the fourth chapter of Will Eisner's book on how to create comics. That contract between the artist and the reader has to be laid down on the experience, the shared experiences of the two. So if you have French comics, yes, they're going to go for a French feel and a French understanding of things. And if you have an American comic, they're going to go and be laid down on an American understanding. But at the same time, there are some comics and there are some ways of telling comics that I would say transcend the cultural barrier. But at the same time, that's an interesting way of looking at it, guys. Let's see. And there's another comment here from he's got a bunch of them. He says, American comics are like watching a serial TV show with a lot of zooms. Japan is like an action movie with special effects. Mm, I don't know about that. With well, a lot of well, the thing is that with manga, I would say the action is categorized much different than American or French comics. And again, that's because of the Japanese way, I think, of how power is expressed within the universe. And I did in a video about this again, probably about 4 months ago, talking about the difference between, maybe a little longer, the difference between American comics and manga, whereas the difference is power, how they view power, where in the American way of looking at it, the European way of looking at it, is that, it comes from the will and it's internalized into the individual. And so you focus on the individual, whereas you have manga, which is very much a oriental way of thinking, and it's based upon the exercising of power, which goes back to almost your Buddhist way of thinking, wherein all the forces around you. It's almost think of it almost in terms of Star Wars. There's this force, this battery force all around you in the universe, and you're just tapping into that force, and so you're more of a conduit for that force. So that is expressed in the different ways that powers are shown on the page. So I would agree there are differences, but again. I think they can be transcended to make it great for anybody, and for basically just a human being that picks up a comic and makes it easy for them to understand. Vaz also says, however, current American comics are mostly soap operas with nonstop talk and self-inserts. Yes, indeed. Because again, they just want to express their own ideas for themselves rather than for the audience. Again, Vaz, you hit the nail on the head right there, because this is what I'm talking about today, about the fact that there needs to be, as Will Eisner says, this contract between the artist and the reader, and that contract is a trust between the two, and that trust between the two is a trust based on not only a shared experience to put Neil Adams back up in the background one more time. Shared experience to understand what is going on, but also a shared experience that is going to lead into the storytelling, which again is between the two, the audience and the artist, whereas the artists that are currently creating things simply want to tell a story for themselves, of themselves. So that's a great point to bring up, as I should do an entire video on that. I think that might be something that I would do. That is a very profound point to bring up. All right, let's see. Mystic also says comic books are similar to storyboards, and many artists who worked in comics also worked in movies and animation in that capacity. Even Jack Kirby did it in the 80s. Jack Kirby actually did animation a lot earlier than the 80s. He worked on things. He worked on Popeye, I think, one of his earliest things. So that was black and white. So yeah, he did animation much earlier. I talked about this last week about the fact that the old schools for making comics and being a comic creator, there were no actual schools for that like there are today for sequential art. The schools were first of all advertising, and secondly, animation. So that's why a lot of people like Will Eisner himself would call himself a cartoonist. He refers to himself as a cartoonist rather than a writer or a artist of sequential art, anything like that. He just says he's a cartoonist because he cut his teeth on these same things. So yeah, storyboards are very much a fundamental element in making, let's say, a show or a movie. And that's why, as I said just a few minutes ago, that Will Eisner again would say that you can take those storyboards, which is basically a comic, and turn it into a movie. But again, taking a movie and then turning it back into storyboards, it doesn't work that way. But yeah, storyboards are essential, and that's one of the things about comics that I think will keep it alive is because we use storyboards for so many things. So it is something that many people have experience with and can break things down into. Let's see here. Robert also says, Pixar films are not realistic. They are believable for the worlds we are creating. Not sure if this is a comment for me, Robert, but I just wanted to. That is actually a good comment in the fact that, again, going back to the idea, just talking about Will Eisner and Jack Kirby and everybody being cartoonists, they talk. I would say, who was it? I was going over interviews with. Oh yeah, it was John Romita and John Romita Jr. and Senior both talking together in an interview, and they're talking about how was it John Romita? I think it was John Romita. But anyways, I can't remember. They're talking about how sometimes, let's say, Jack Kirby's anatomy wasn't exactly as spot on as it should be. It wasn't, and Jack Kirby himself admits this. He says, I could never do anatomy the way that you're supposed to do it. So they used cheats, as they would call them, although most of us wouldn't call them that. They just look like good art. And those cheats are being consistent with the art, and that's exactly what you get in cartooning. That's exactly what you get in animation, whereas things don't follow, let's say, physical laws, and people bend in ways that they're not really supposed to. But as long as there's a consistency there, then that actually works out so that you can again form that contract in the mind of the reader with the person telling the story. Let's see. Yes, Robert continues on and says, it boils down to verisimilitude. Yes, indeed. Verisimilitude is a basic way of reflecting reality, which is what I'm always saying, which is that, a story is a reflection of reality. That's what verisimilitude is. I think I did a video on it. I can't remember if it was just a video or if it was a community post, but that's exactly what, if you're looking at the original first Superman movie, which was Christopher Reeve, the director said, I want it for similitude. He said, I wanted to make it realistic to show you that this person, Clark Kent, Superman, could exist within the real world. So that's a very high point of good storytelling. Let's see. Bethel is here. How you doing? Let's see. Let's scroll down a little bit and see what we got. See if anybody. Oh, let's see who else is here. Genuine Comics is here. How you doing? A lot of people showing up tonight. We got 24 people in the chat. That's great. Let's see. I think there's chat going on in the chat that doesn't have anything to do with me, so I'll skip down a little bit. Rex, I think, is talking to me when he says, if it helps any, listening to your series and the notes have caused me to reevaluate what I've been doing with my comic, and I realize I went about it wrong. So I'm starting over and doing better. Well, it's always good to recognize your mistakes. I won't be pointing any fingers at you, Rex, but it's I think that's one of the things. This self-realization, Rex, I'll put it this way, that self-realization that I should do something better, that is something that is sorely missing within current comic books and how they are creating current comic books. I covered this only briefly on some of the videos that I did about the fact that when they're talking about editors, and there's so many editors that want to talk from Marvel Comics especially, and they're talking about how you never tell the artist no. You never do that. they just come out and say it. They say, you have to help them along with how they want to tell the story and present to them ways which they could tell it better, perhaps, but never tell them that they're wrong in doing it. And when you don't have that, you don't, well, I would say, let me put it the opposite way. The people who are writing these stories, since they're ideologically driven in a way that's based upon feeling, and they've never actually had to deal with the harsh reality of reality itself, they don't have the capacity to deal with someone telling them that they're wrong, first of all, which is why they have to be treated with kid gloves. And from that, they don't have the capacity to self criticize. And therefore, they never make anything better than what they just want to do for themselves. Kudos to you, Rex, for having enough self realization to realize that you want to make your stuff better based upon what other people have who have created great comics throughout history, through the history of comic books, anyways. Kudos to you for making that realization. That's something that I struggle with myself, and even I'm going over the scripts right now for the lettering for the the last part of the Valiant Heroes, and I'm saying to myself, "Oh, I wish I had not have done that because now I know better, and I should have done better for this panel, that panel." So yeah, I'm right with you, Rex. Let's see, Vaz, I think has a comment saying, "Is Conan a paragon of virtue? Should the same be true to the original Red Sonja?" Well, this is something I did talk about since my book is Karam the Destroyer. It's based upon the Robert E. Howard characters trying to take Conan and Kull and Solomon Kane and sort of combining them together in the original. With the original source material that especially Conan came from, but Kull as well, and a little bit of Solomon Kane, which is the Celtic mythology. So to combine all those three together in one character using the Celtic mythology as a really essential part to do that. So I have a lot of Conan-esque stuff in there, certainly. But is Conan a paragon of virtue? This is what I always say, and I've said in my live streams from the beginning. You have to look at the stories of Robert E. Howard as a whole in order to understand the heroic nature of Conan. Most people would say he's not. Most people would say he is an anti-hero, that he just stumbles upon these heroics and he's not really a paragon of virtue. I would say that if you look at the stories of Robert E. Howard itself, you'll notice that the very first story he published for Conan, because he did Kull stories first, they didn't take off as well as he wanted, so he revamped the character of Kull into Conan. And the very first story he told, if I remember correctly, is the Eagle and the Sword. There's different names for a lot of his stories, but I believe that's the original title for that story. And Conan there is a king. So he's already got to the point where he is a king. Again, it's a revamping of the old Kull stories because let me put up some of my Crom the Destroyer since I'm talking. Since I am talking about Conan right now, put up some of that stuff in the background. I'll put up my comic. But yes, Vaz, since Conan, the original story was him being a king, and he was a lawful good king. You can tell from the story he's a lawful good king at that time. And then he goes back and tells stories from earlier on in his life, and he goes to fairly quickly one of the stories where he is the very first, I think the earliest in his life was the Frost Giant's daughter. But the other stories where he gets into the situation, he comes across a seer who says, "You're going to become king." And so you see this man's progression from being a barbarian to being a lawful good king. And Conan is definitely a lawful good king. He is an honorable king. In stories like, the Red Citadel, there he's basically facing death, and they say to him, "Look, we'll give you as much riches as you can carry. You're a barbarian, take them with our blessing and just leave the throne." And he says, "Absolutely not. I won't. I saved these people from a tyrannical king," which he did, "and I will not abandon them to tyrannical people again." So he has an honorable kingship. He will not abandon his people, and he is a lawful good king. And that's what he is pointed towards through the entire section of the Robert E. Howard stories, because the very first story that he ever wrote about Conan shows him at that end point. So I would say yes, he's a man on a journey. Those stories themselves don't show him always as being the most virtuous, to say the least. I will agree on that point, definitely. But again, keeping in mind that end point, which is the first story that Robert E. Howard ever wrote for the character, you'll see it is a journey of this character from barbarism to that honorable kingdom that he has built, which is a beacon of hope for the entire world that he lives in. So I would say yes. Conan is, I would say, a traditional form of a hero, although he's not always a paragon of virtue. He's a man on a journey. He's very much I think this is why he works so well within the Marvel retelling of his stories for the older Marvel comics, is because he's a man on a journey to become that paragon of virtue, that at the very least, the old world paragon of virtue that allows him to be a just king. And again, Marvel much more is looking at that journey of the character and their struggles. So that's why it works with Marvel. I've probably gone on a little bit too much, but I want to answer your next question. Should the same be true of the original Red Sonja? Now, Red Sonja is a character I'm not familiar with in the totality of everything that was written originally about her. So I could not say cohesively that same thing could be true, because I don't think um, exhaustively gone through all of the stories and everything else from the original material. I don't think, because honestly, I wouldn't even, I haven't even run across anything that gives me the totality of that. But again, Red Sonja is an interesting character, which you look at a lot of the stuff today, you'll have it erased the fact that, because it's probably not politically correct, the fact that originally her powers came from her power as a swordsman. Her power as a swordsman was from the fact, if I remember correctly, that her she was just basically a peasant in a village. Her village was sacked by these soldiers, and they will try to make it friendly for YouTube. They ravaged her, and so she prayed to, I think it was Mithra, and said, help me make sure that this never happens to me again. And so this is the origin of Red Sonja, and why she's such a good swordsman is because she has this blessing of Mithra, if I remember correctly, to ensure that that will never happen to her again. She'll never be overcome by a man. So again, that ties into a lot of the story and a lot of what the character is doing. And again, that for a lot of the current iterations of Red Sonja, that's been completely erased. So I think that when you erase that, you erase a lot of what the character actually is. So again, I've probably gone on way too long about Conan and Red Sonja. I'll have to leave it there. Let's say Elijah is here. How you doing? Yes, late start tonight, Elijah. What else? I typed you in earlier because I didn't see you at 10. Yeah, unfortunately, I had to go really late tonight, just the way that I have to deal with my internet still. Oh, by the way, just quick note to everybody: 25 people in the chat. I'm shoring up my internet problems. We're getting some better satellite internet, so hopefully we're going to have a lot more, possibly even on the live streams. I might have some other people come on if I get the problem fixed with my internet, where I have this lag because I have satellite internet. But we're gonna see if we can fix that. Bethel says, I just want to read this because it's Conan. In Greek sense, Vaz, in a Greek sense, Conan is a paragon of virtue. In the Christian sense, it is rather difficult, since Conan is a thief, a reaver, a slayer, and a gigantic, with gigantic melancholies and gigantic mirth. It's exactly what I was just trying to say, Bethel. You've condensed my ramblings down to a few coherent sentences. Thank you very much. That is correct. Let's see. Sound Engraver is thanking me while give you out another shout out to Sound Engraver, and let everybody know that you have a channel. Everybody should go over to Sound Engravers. Robert says he's subscribed to Sound Engraver. Great to hear. Let's see. Oh, I got a super chat. Look at that. Thank you very much. Mythogenesis Studios Comics for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Says, sorry if not on topic, but is there a good place to promote an Indiegogo comic book project if you don't have a large internet following? That is a good question. And here's the thing. I think I started off this section of my live streams by talking about that you might want to go back through the live streams, Mythogenesis, to the very, like, not the earliest live stream that I did, but the earliest that I've done of this section. So probably about 2 months ago, I talked about crowdfunding 101. I think the video is called. So the problem with any, I'd say, crowdfunding, and this expanded more than just crowdfunding, is you have to actually build an audience before you produce anything that's going to sell. I know it sounds a little counterintuitive that before you actually tell a story, you have to have people ready to hear you tell a story. It doesn't quite make sense, but that's the way it has to go. So you have to build yourself up a following on the internet. Try and get yourself um, a large audience somewhere. Just because, no, there really isn't much way that you can promote yourself on the indie scene unless it's directly to your audience. And again, that will be through having a YouTube channel or having a large following on Twitter, or I guess Facebook, if people still use Facebook, things like that. Whatever other platforms that you use, I guess TikTok and, Instagram and things like that. I don't use those platforms, so I couldn't say. But you have to build up your own following. There are some people that will help promote your books just because you're out there in the sphere of indie comics, but it's not something that's going to give you a lot of traction. It's something that is, quite honestly, the way that a lot of people gain traction for their books is by promoting other people's books. You see Michael Bancroft over at Late Night for Comicsgate. He does that. He promotes and has from the beginning of his channel. All he does is helps promote other people and their comics, and that's how he promotes his comics. Because a lot of people, his followers, know that you're going to get uh, a peek at some great comic books when you go over to his channel and listen to his live chats. So that's something here we might do here after a while. I don't know, but just because, like I said, if I get my stuff together with my internet and fix it up, we might have some guests on here. We'll never know. Depends on what we're going to do here. But thank you very much once again for the super chat, Mythogenesis. And I'm sorry, but to answer your question in the negative, but really, you have to build that internet following in order to really sell your books one way or another. That's an old rule. It's not just true for the internet. When I used to, long and ever before the internet, and you had to send things through the mail, I tried to get things into magazines and stuff like that. Yeah, you had to build your following, very much so. So scrolling down. Rex says, fun history fact. Earliest known werewolves in histories for the 400s, Herodotus's histories, yes, wrote about the Norui tribe in northern Ukraine who claimed to transform into wolves for a few days each year. Very interesting. I definitely have read Herodotus. Quite honestly, I think it is Herodotus was the very first part of Herodotus, not all of Herodotus, honestly. The very first thing I ever translated was into English from Greek in my Greek classes long and ever ago was Herodotus. So yeah, very interesting. I'll have to look that up, Rex. Here's the thing, though. If you look at a lot of early travel journals and things like that, or people who are talking in the ancient world about going from different places, they always talk about, and even mythologies, they talk about dog-headed people and cat-headed people sometimes. So it's really strange to see that over so many mythologies and so many different cultures, they talk about this same thing with dog people and dog-headed people, which again, you could go back and talk about those in terms of werewolves. But quite honestly, I think it's the fact that you have ancients who were never able to see any other people except for the kinds of people and really the races of people that were around them. And so they went to other places and saw people that were of other races and they thought they looked like dogs. That would be my take on it. I don't know how else you could actually explain this idea that is so prevalent throughout mythology and early histories of the popping up of dog head and cat head people. So that's another thing to look at if you're looking through stories and ancient text for werewolf material, which is a very interesting thing to do. Let's see. Stress level is here. How you doing, stress level? Great to see you here. Da, da, da. Rex says, I meant 400 BC. Yes, BCE. Well, I just say BC. Scrolling down. Elijah says, RJ, some anime and manga are based on mythology, like how Goku is based on Chinese monkey deity Sun Wukong. I never knew that. I wasn't ever, I never really followed anything or watched anything with Goku, whatever it is, Dragon Ball, is it? But that would make sense. That would make perfect sense. Yeah, I know the story of the Chinese monkey deity. He basically kept on getting more powerful and more powerful and more powerful. And I think the original stories have him being defeated by the Buddha at the end, so that he's buried under a mountain, things like that. Because again, as I was just talking about, the idea of Buddhism is that Buddha is connected to the entire universe and has, you know, the most he's the most in tune with the universe. He's the most enlightened, so he can basically tap into all of the power of the entire universe. And it doesn't matter that the Monkey King is so. If we're talking about the same story, the Chinese Monkey King was OP. He was overpowered to say the least and kept on gaining power, but the Buddha was able to defeat him because he had all power at his fingertips, which was the universal power. Anyways, but yeah, that would make sense that Dragon Ball is based upon that. I had never known that. Thank you very much for bringing that up. But yeah, that is a good example of what I was talking about. Let's see. Scrolling down, Mike or Robert says, I got to bring it up on the main screen so I can read it. My archetype is a trickster and mentor. Very frustrating for the hero. Very much so, but that's a good way to do it, because as a trickster, you can actually be a mentor in a way that, you're pulling out the rug from underneath the person that you're training and have a little laugh at it. So it's a good technique for storytelling, Robert. Let's see. Scrolling down. Let's see. Mystic says, I forgot that Kirby worked for Fletcher Studios. Yes, he did indeed. He actually talks about this is why he really poured all of his energy into making comics after a while, is because he hated working for the animation studios. He really, really didn't like it. He was just, a cog in a machine there instead of a creator. So he really didn't like that. Let's see, scrolling down. There's that conversation going on, I think, between Elijah and Rex. Let's see. Although let's bring up this comment from Rex. I've heard realism summarized nowadays as acknowledging generally ignored narrative consequences. That's an interesting way of putting it. I don't think acknowledging generally ignored negative consequences. Yeah, I guess that's a basic way of understanding it, because again, realism is based on reality, and reality, as I always say, if you try to violate the rules of reality, reality will smack you to the ground. So yeah, that's a pretty good definition, Rex. Let's see. Random is here. How you doing, Random? He says he's just got here. That's okay. I'm sure I've been rambling plenty since you put up that comment. So you might be able to catch up with my ramblings. Let's see. Jimmy Reyes Art is here. Jimmy, how you doing? I think you've been here before, but I can't remember everybody that's been in my chat. It's great to see you here. He says, in order to make comics more dynamic, we should exaggerate the anatomy and break some rules because it is 2D images. Yes, Jimmy Reyes, this is something I talked about, I think about 3-4 weeks ago when or maybe a little longer, on my live stream for Wednesday. I went over some of the Image Comics guys in an interview that they did. I think it was with Marvel. It was basically early 90s, and they were saying exactly that in some way. because they're talking about the fact that dynamism, I'm sure you probably know this better than me, Jimmy. The dynamism that they talked about in that interview. So it's basically Jim Lee and Willis Portacio, if I could say his name correctly. And who else was there? There was Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, and a couple other guys. I think Stan Lee was there as well. Anyways, they're talking about how when you take the body proportions for sequential art and you're putting it down on the page, it's best to take the centers of gravity of each of the limbs of the body or parts of the body and stretch them out as much as possible. And that's how you gain dynamism within those panels. And I would say, and I talked about, as I said a couple of weeks ago on my live stream, I think that's why you have, Superman in his traditional pose where he has one hand cocked back and one arm out, because you have a stretching out of the centers of gravity of each limb and the center mass of the body. So yeah, you're completely right. So that's an exaggerated pose, but it's an exaggerated pose which you get from dynamism. Also, of course, I did talk about this probably a while ago on one of my videos. The actual proportions for comic book art are not the same proportions as reality, because it doesn't look exactly right, as you're saying right here, as a 2D image to the reader. And this was figured out by, I think it was one of the artists for Tarzan. So this is a long time ago. I think it was like the 40s and the 50s that he was doing this. So he came out with new body proportions that he put into his Tarzan comic strip. And it's basically based upon the head size of your character, because basically you're going to almost always put the head in. So whereas he took, and I can't remember this off the top of my head. I should actually know these proportions off the top of my head, but I don't. He based upon, the body is this many heads high and the legs are this many heads high and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's an exaggerated, slightly elongated. I'll put something up in the background once again, the Crom the Destroyer art, in case you're wondering what I'm showing. That, as I said, that Tarzan, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but that Tarzan artist, he basically created the fundamentals for sequential art, and how, yes, it is exaggerated to the anatomy. And again, you exaggerated the poses of the anatomy as well, in order to, again, draw the eye to thinking that it is a 3D, three-dimensional representation in their mind, even though they're only looking at a two-dimensional image. So you're spot on, Jimmy. So that is very, very good thing to bring up. And which, again, who is it? Somebody broke that. Who is it? Who is? Oh yeah, Vertigo Comics. The original artist for Sandman. They broke that for the first time in decades and decades. When they made that book, they went back to the original proportions of human beings in order to make the book look different from superhero comics. And that's why Vertigo has a different feel to it, and you might not actually know what's going on, why it looks so different. It's because they don't take those exaggerated proportions, which are normal for comics, which were originally laid down by that Tarzan artist, but they went back to original, just normal body proportions of people. So that's why that comic looks different, if you're wondering. Scrolling down. One of the fun things I always bring up is I worked with Don Chen to do one of the backup stories for Thomas Valiant #2, and Don Chen is a great guy. He has done indie comics from the early 80s onwards. So great fella, John Chen. Great to work with. But one of his stories that he published, I think it was the early 80s, was with the original artist for Sandman. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. He was doing a book with him called, what the heck is it? Eclipse, with Eclipse Comics is what they were publishing it. It was a fantasy novel, graphic novel, basically. And they never got to finish it because DC stole him away from Don Chen to have him write Sandman. So, it's fun to be a part of that world right now, since Don, I think I would categorize Don as one of my friends. So he's a great guy. I think he has a channel as well. He was just on John's Long Box, which is another great comic book channel that does showcases for great older comic books, and also does interviews with so many people. Right now, Don is doing so many great interviews with comic book artists. He just did one with Don Chin. Anyways, back to the comments. Random says, your catchphrase should be scrolling down. That's not actually my catchphrase, Random. The reason why I say scrolling down is because if you were around 5, 6 years ago when Richard over at Comics Matter, which used to be Diversity in Comics, when he originally did live streams, that was his catchphrase. He said scrolling down all the time. That's why I'm just imitating Rich when he was doing that. So yeah, I guess it's become mine because Richard doesn't do live streams and he hasn't for a long time. Honestly, I was originally attracted to his channel because of those live streams. They were so fun. Hopefully I'm capturing some of that fun here as well. I wish I could do more, but we'll see if again we can get some more people in here to help me along with making some great live streams for all you guys. Let's see. Scrolling down. Random also says, when I published my book on Amazon, I got flooded with thoughts of, dang it, why didn't I do it that way? It's definitely a feeling that must be overcome. Yes, indeed. But again, self-criticism is a great thing. It shows you that you have some really constructive criticism baked into your thought and allows you to become better, which is again sorely missing in so many people that write right now. Rex also says, part of what makes me realize that I did my comic wrong was when I tried to consider my first third chapter in first third chapters into a single shorter one, and the results were better than expected. That's always always good to again, I get you go back to the Will Eisner idea of break things down to their fundamentals, and it doesn't have to be exact panels. This is one of the things. I'll finish my thought first. It doesn't have to be exact panels that you would normally get. It has to be exact panels like it doesn't have to be exact panels that you would normally get in a movie or something like that. It has to be exact panels in a way that draws the reader's mind along so that he completes the story and so that the reader can fill in the blanks where basically you have a panel gutter between one panel and another so that they can understand the flow of the story. So if you can do it and you can condense it down to that, and I think that shows the an advanced stage or a much more advanced stage than early ways of making comics. So you understand that you can condense it down into its um, more fundamental precepts. I guess you put it that way. So yeah, good to hear, Rex. Let's see. I'll scroll down a little more, random, to see what else we have here. Let's see. uh, Breaker's here, and he says, basically put scrolling down on a mug. Yeah. Oh, wait a minute. I missed a comment. Random says, no, sorry, Breaker says, random RJ would sell reading slash blue light glasses with those quotes. Not entirely sure. I think I'll extract myself from this conversation because I don't understand what's going on here. Yes, Robert, I'm trying to get Starlink, which is going to hopefully get me into a much faster bracket so that I can stream much more. The reason why I stream this way is because basically I'm on a lag and you guys don't know it. It's probably like a 2-second lag, but you can't hear it because I'm just talking to myself and talking to the chat. But if I have other people on, you would definitely hear the lag in my feed. So Starlink hopefully will take care of that. Tony is here. Tony says, I would think that Solomon Kane is more heroic than Conan. I would agree. Solomon Kane is more heroic than Conan. This is part of the reason why I wanted to combine all those three characters together in Crown the Destroyer. But again, the funny thing and the reason why I want to combine all of those three together, because I think that if you read it and look at Robert E. Howard's work, you'll see that Conan is a copy of Kull and Solomon Kane is a copy of Conan. Quite honestly, because in that first story, the Conan first story, which is again the sword and the eagle, I think it is, if I remember correctly. But anyways, what he does is he has the character Conan who picks up an axe and he almost has racial memories of Kull in his mind because Conan is supposed to be a descendant of Kull the Conqueror. So you have those racial memories flooding back to him. and you can see that there's a connection between those characters, and it's basically a retelling of Kull in a new way, which is Conan. But you also have the same thing within Solomon Kane. There is a story, oh, I can't remember what it is, what the name of the story is for Solomon Kane off the top of my head, but it's the one where he's tracking down, what is it, the fox, which is, he's like a French, let's see, he's a French reaver who basically killed this woman because he wanted to do it. And Solomon Kane is just tracking him down. And he tracks him down, I think, if I remember the story correctly, all the way to across the Black River, which is basically in Africa. Anyways, the thing is that during this story, he gets tangled up with this tribe of, I think, African people, if I remember correctly. But again, he starts to have racial memories of when Conan actually was in the exact same spot. So yeah, it's a retelling of a character of a retelling of a character, and I think Solomon Kane was probably the more pure version that Robert E. Howard wanted to tell of that character, which again just runs all the way through Kull and then Conan and then Solomon Kane. And yes, he does have more heroic traits. Would agree completely. Let's see. Mythogenesis is thanking me for my comment. Again, I wish it could be more help, Mythogenesis, but really that's the way that it is. Robert says, looking forward to Crom. If you want to see some new, like really like from the last couple of days, art for Crom the Destroyer. I just got some pages back from my artist, and I am posting them little by little. The good panels, I want to say the good panels, the panels that are best for me to show by themselves. I am posting them on Twitter. So again, my Twitter handle is in the description of this video if you want to go and follow me. And again, since we're talking about Crom the Destroyer, I'm going to re-up that Crom the Destroyer. I'll put, oh, here's some newer art, not the new stuff I'm talking about, but some newer art for Crom the Destroyer in the background. So I am looking forward to Crom the Destroyer as well, Robert. It is a pleasure to work on that book, and I really wish it had done better. It didn't do very well. I was looking to make at least 20K on that book. I think we're about 2K short of that. But I want to do that book more and more, and hopefully the spectacular nature of the art is going to sell it so that we can do more stories for Crom. Let's see. Scrolling down. Da, 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 da. Let's see. Breaker says, sadly, there's no easy way to get attention in an indie comic without building yourself up. Agreed completely. Let's see. Scrolling down. Da, 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 da. Robert Fry says Anubis had a dog head. Yeah, if I remember, it was a jackal head, if I remember correctly. But yeah, a dog, basically. So, yeah, it's funny that you see that throughout history. One of the funny things I always say. Breaker. I don't know if I want to read this comment, Breaker, but I will. So furries were always a problem. I guess we'll never be free from them. Excuse me. But that is hilarious. Yes, they are a problem. I would agree to that. A problem indeed. Rex says, the modern equivalent of those dog-headed people is a cryptid called a Michigan dogman. Really? Even Augustine of Hippo had something to say about that. Yeah, he did. Uh, what is it? When Augustine's talking about, I think, the flood and the people that existed before the flood, he also goes into a little bit of that. He talks about not so much what was, he talks about there are these accounts, he says, of people of this kind and people of that kind. So he goes into some historical accounts that people gave to say perhaps this might have something to do with, older times that we are basically lost to memory of mankind because they've receded into the category of mythology. Scrolling down, let's see. Michael says the dog-headed men of India are documented in several ancient scholars. Yep, that's one of the things I was just referring to. Yeah, indeed, they are. Let's see. Robert says there are also vampire legends in almost every culture. Yeah, one of the things with Crom the Destroyer, since you're looking forward to Crom the Destroyer, Robert, is you'll notice on the Indiegogo page, again, link for that is in the description. There is a poster you can get with Crom, for Crom the Destroyer with harpies in the background, very much the Greek way of looking at harpies. And again, they are incorporated into the story with other sort of Greek mythological creatures as well. So you'll also get something that is almost like a fury. If you know what furies are in the Greek mythology, they are very much described in a vampiric way, so much so that they have these fangs, and those fangs have, what is it? If you go back to the Oresteia, they bleed, um, what is it, venom, like a snake would. And so they can in the Oresteia, I think after they lose their court case to Orestes, and Apollo is the one who is doing the judging, at that time they release the venom from their fangs and scorch the earth with it. But they're very much can be, by some anyways, some people read them as being an early proto vampire story. Let's see. I missed where I was in the chat, so I got to scroll down because if when I change my screens, it just jumps on me. Let's see. There we are. Okay. Scrolling down. See where I am. Oh, here we go. Sound Engraver has a question. RJ, super chats for my part are coming once I am not broke. Weddings can sure clean out a couple's wallet. Yes, in case anybody is wondering what Sound Engraver is talking about, she is getting married to Professor Geek. And again, once again, I always like to extend my congratulations both to Sound Engraver and to Professor Geek. Hopefully, a Sound Engraver, you'll get some nice fat envelopes at your wedding, and it'll help you along with getting your life started together. Let's see. Scrolling down. Rex says also, I heard that Augustine of Hippo thought that a werewolf could exist, but only if God allowed it, and thought that the idea of some physical transformations into a wolf was impossible. Yeah, this is really one of the things that Augustine talks about. It's really interesting. Even if it's a book that most people would just think of as a religious book, which is the City of God, and that's primarily what it is. But he does talk a lot about what things could exist, because he's talking about how the city of God is different from the city of man, and he's talking about the city of man at some points. As in terms of the Roman Empire and their beliefs and some of their superstitions and how they tried to do things like themogony. Themogony would be in capturing spirits and putting them into, let's see, almost like a golem, but capturing a spirit and putting it into a statue, things like that. So he talks a lot about, and in certain sections, these fun ideas about could this exist? When they believe these things exist, are they demons? What are they? A lot of things like that. So yeah, Rex, it is a great book to read, and he does go into that kind of thing. Let's see. Vaz says, when I got into comics, I didn't really like Kirby's art style because it looked too 60s. When I got older, I liked his art because it looked like the 60s. Sometimes old comics are like archaeology. Yeah, I agree. I used to have, from the very first time I was reading comics, I had Kirby comics in front of me. But even because my brother collected Captain America, and so he had Kirby comics of Captain America, but it wasn't exactly my thing. And I like you, Vaz, did not appreciate Kirby until I really got into comics much heavier. Let's see, scrolling down. Samuel is here. How you doing, Samuel? He says, just got off from rewatching Alien. What a great horror movie. I actually just bought another copy of Alien. No, actually, what I bought another copy of Aliens, which is the second one. I think my original DVD of Alien I bought probably in like 1995. I still got it. Great movie. Let's see. Scrolling down. Yes. Calliope, how you doing? Says scrolling down was from Diversity in Comics. Yes, indeed. That's exactly when it back in Diversity in Comics days. Let's see. Calliope also says, let me bring this up so I can read it. I get an eerie nostalgia buzz when I was circa 2016. I hear RJ saying scrolling down. Again, that's kind of what I'm going for here. Let's see, because here's the thing that I like about Richard, and that he really opened up for the rest of us, is that he always used to say, "Here, I'm doing my live streams recorded on a baked potato," or something like that. Basically saying that I'm going to fumble and bumble around. I don't have the best sound quality or anything like that, but we're going to talk about comics and just have fun. And really, I think that was part of why he gained such a large following. Let's see, scrolling down, scrolling down. Da, da, da. 40% Zed is here. How you doing? I missed you, boy, Zach. It feels like his arc was his enemies couldn't bring him down, but one of his friends convinced him to give up. Well, that might be true. I don't know, but he is certainly not. He certainly has changed. We'll put it that way. And yeah, I still do listen to his videos every once in a while, but not as intently, not as excitedly as I used to. We'll put it that way. Scrolling down. Let's see. Random has to go. He says, I'll see you later. Hopefully, if you're still here, Random, see you later. Let's see. Scrolling down. Pumpkin Joe 99. How you doing? Says, Cap is my favorite hero. I really enjoy we'll say that, I think it's what is it? The John Byrne run on Captain America, I think, was with we have the Mike Zeck, and then the John Byrne run on Captain America. Those are phenomenal comics. And after that, you get Captain America just in his basic heroic mode. So yeah, Pumpkin, I would agree. Cap is one of my inspirational heroes. I'll put it that way. He's the person who, quite honestly, I used to watch. There was a very old show. I don't know if it was like it might have even been the 60s, or it could have been early 70s, of the Avengers, where you had Captain America and the Avengers. It was pretty campy if you look at it today, but when you're watching it back then, there was a little short at the end. It was kind of like the GI Joe, and now little bit at the end where they do a little public service thing. But one of them was Captain America talking about standing up straight and having respect for yourself. And honestly, I took that to heart when I watched those cartoons so long ago, and it was one of the things that made me want to stand up straight, have respect for myself, and really build up my body and be heroic in my own life. So Captain America is an inspiration to me as well. Let's see. Robert says, I do like Cap so long as he's not aligned with Hydra. Yeah, unfortunately, I think Captain America is dead. He died with those stories. And I don't think we're ever going to get him back, unfortunately. Let's see. Scrolling down. And we'll see. Calliope says, we'll get to the last of these comments because we've been talking for almost an hour and a half now, and we're getting to the bottom of the comments. Calliope says, I like the idea of Solomon Kane is descendant of Kull and Conan. Yeah. And the thing is that, again, one of the fun things about Robert E. Howard is you have to understand, to some extent, the world that he lived in and how much limited capacity of knowledge that they had about science and different things. So I'll give you this example. When 2001 came out, the movie 2001, they have a scene where they're on the moon. But the thing is that scene where they're on the moon in 2001 was done a year before anybody actually got to the moon. So they had to sort of figure out on their own what a scene would look like by people being on the moon, because no one had actually been to the moon at that point. And so they did the best they could. And so that's what you kind of get with Robert E. Howard stories, because he's working off of a lot of ideas about, basically evolution and evolutionary ideas that you would get in the 20s, the 1920s and the 1930s. So you get a lot of that. And you also get a lot of other ideas that were starting to run through the mainstream within the 1920s and 30s. And some of that would be racial history and a racial identity that you could feel in your blood. And that's why you have these characters that he has in his stories. They have this blood connection to these older characters that he writes in his own history of his own world, and this blood history is dragged up when they encounter something similar. So it's very interesting to read Robert E. Howard when you understand a lot of the intellectual where he's coming from with a lot of intellectual stuff that is surrounding him at the time. Some of that, again, would be why there are so many monkeys and things like that, and why you see people evolving and devolving from monkeys and things like that within his stories. Very, very interesting stuff. Let's see. I thought I was getting to the bottom of the chat, but it just skipped on me again, and it doesn't look like I'm anywhere close. Let's see. Let's see. Let's see. 1 second here. We got Tony has a comment, says, I apologize if I missed anybody's comments, but there's a lot of comments not for me here. So if you have one, you can stick it back in the chat. I will get it to you if I missed it. Tony says, do you think that characters in the public domain are safe from the effects of post-modernity? I don't know, Tony. I really don't. I think that quite honestly, here's my take on it. I don't think that you're going to have, or anybody's going to have much traction with public domain heroes, because they've just gone out of, and purposely most probably gone out of, the mind's eye of the people who are writing stories and people who are consuming stories. And so it's better, I would say, to use them as almost mythological figures for stories. And because they're public domain, right, you can stick them in there and you're not going to cost you anything, and you're not going to get into legal trouble if you're just, referencing them here and there. If there is any more legal trouble, like let's say when Superman or Batman come into public domain in the next 10 years, things like that, use them as like almost mythological figures in your storytelling. That would be the way that I think they will build up those characters again, and possibly be able to retell those stories in a better way than what you're seeing right now anyways. All right. So scrolling down, Rex says, the Phoenix and the Sword, that's it. Rex says the first Conan story was the Phoenix and the Sword. Yes, that's the one it's not the eagle and the sword, it's the Phoenix and the Sword. You are right, Rex. That was what I was trying to think of. Also, I've got a Descendant of the Furies as a villain in my comic, as he's very tough. Very interesting. All right, let's see. I'll scroll down a little more, see how close I am to the bottom of the chat. Samuel says, I think we as modern people take ourselves too seriously when it comes to movie tastes, calling fun entertainment that the silent and greatest generation made corny and campy. To some extent. Again, corny and campy is honestly a way to say that it's fun, if you ask me. But again, here's the thing about, there was a series a long time ago that I listened to on the radio. It was a long series. It was on public radio. It was about the history of comedy, and one of the things that these historians of comedy acknowledged is that comedy does not travel well over space or time. So that's one of the things that you have to really, comedy really depends. I guess we go back to the Will Eisner way. Comedy really depends heavily on the shared experience of the place and time that you're in order to convey that link between the artist and the audience. And so that's why I think that so many people look at them as being corny and campy, is if you look at older comics or older stories, is because these are ones that are containing a lot of humor, and that humor is probably only accessible to its full extent by the people who lived in that time and place. And so that's really what I would say is probably the heart of the definition of corny and campy. But I agree. We should look at a lot of the older media and entertainment in a much more reverent light. Let's see. Scrolling down. Yes, Robert says, and I agree completely. He says, Batman and Superman are American mythology. I agree. To some extent, they will be more so when they go into the public domain, if you ask me. Let's see. I think I'm getting to the bottom of the chat. I am indeed. I got to the bottom. People are having a discussion about the Three Stooges. But it's great to see everybody here. We still have 25 people in the chat. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here. Let's see. I got to take this off 1 second. I'll take Robert off the screen. And oh no, what did I do? I thank you very much for everybody for being here and talking about great comics, talking about how comics are great and really the great way to appreciate comics. Hopefully I didn't miss anybody's comments in the chat, and I've been talking for over an hour and 30 minutes. So I will just say thank you very much once again for everybody, and I will leave you with the second short trailer for Crom the Destroyer. It's only about 45 seconds if you want to take a look at what Crom the Destroyer is more about. Links for Crom the Destroyer and Thomas Valiant and the Valiant Heroes are all in the description if you want to go over to those Indiegogo pages and order my graphic novels. Thank you once again, and I will see you all later. Bye.
No matter how many wars you fight, no matter how much blood you shed, no matter how much rage you loose, no matter how many demons you face, no matter how many companions you lose, no matter if our kingdom falls, I know that you will return to me in honor.